Happy Saturday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where we discuss leading political, economic, and geostrategic news and analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. It has been a huge day. It's been a huge week. We have a lot to cover. Let's jump in. We are witnessing a full collapse in the massive US-China trading relationship, and if things continue this way, the political relationship could be next. On Friday, yesterday, Beijing announced it will raise tariffs on all US goods to 125%, up from the average of 84% before, effective the 12th of April, today. The move comes in direct response to Washington's decision to hike duties on Chinese imports to as much as 145%, a figure clarified in a White House memo earlier this week. Quote, "Given that American goods are no longer marketable in China under the current tariff rates, if the US further raises tariffs on Chinese exports, China will disregard such measures." End quote, the Ministry of Finance said in a sharp statement. The rhetoric was echoed by the Ministry of Commerce, which accused the US of turning tariff policy into little more than political theatre. Quote, "It's become a joke," end quote, the ministry said in a statement on Friday, calling the approach, quote, "economically meaningless," end quote, and a form of, quote, "unilateral bullying and coercion," end quote. The reaction from global markets was swift and negative. Futures for the S&P 500 fell alongside European shares, while the Hang Seng China Enterprises Index appeared gains. The US dollar dropped to a 3-year low in trading on Friday against the euro, further reflecting investor unease over the escalating conflict. US-based Bloomberg Economics warned in a note on Friday that a full US-China economic decoupling, once seen as implausible, is now a real possibility. General Secretary Xi Jinping weighed in on the situation for the first time too, expressing during a meeting with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, quote, "There are no winners in a trade war. One that goes against the world risks becoming isolated themselves." End quote. Beyond tariffs, Beijing is broadening the scope of its response. As we discussed in yesterday's video, Chinese authorities have cut the number of US films allowed in theaters, warned students about safety risks in certain US states, and advised citizens against travel to the US. These moves signal a deterioration not just in trade relations, but in people-to-people and cultural ties as well. Meanwhile, China is taking internal steps to cushion the blow. JD.com, one of the country's largest e-commerce firms, announced a 200 billion yuan, $27 billion plan to purchase export-bound goods and resell them in the domestic market. Alibaba's supermarket arm has pledged to support exporters shifting to local sales. These moves aim to absorb the shock of collapsing US demand while bolstering domestic consumption. As regular viewers will know, however, the issue in China is massive overcapacity, and they suffer from chronically weak consumption. So these moves can only be short-term. Experts believe Beijing's decision to stop matching every US tariff increase is a calculated one. Quote, "By signaling that it will ignore future US hikes, China lets Trump claim a tactical victory while positioning itself as the more rational actor," end quote, said Dylan Lowe, assistant professor at Nanyang Technology University, adding, quote, "They are telegraphing to the international community that they won't be dragged into endless escalation," end quote. While this may be the case, as we have discussed before, with a massive trade surplus with the US and with an economy more reliant on exports for growth, China is in the weaker position, especially if Washington can negotiate trade solutions with other countries and isolate the Middle Kingdom. US-China trade, valued at over $700 billion annually, now stands on dangerous ground. Key American exports to China, such as soybeans, petroleum gas, and semiconductor equipment, face steep new barriers, while Chinese electronics and consumer goods are becoming increasingly expensive in the US. Goldman Sachs has already cut China's 2025 GDP forecast from 4.5% to 4%, citing the likely drag from reduced exports, with China needing massive debt-fueled fiscal stimulus just to reach that 4%. Both economies are now bracing for impact, and the US economists warned that the new tariffs could fuel inflation and job losses. Carl Weinberg, chief economist at High Frequency Economics, believes a recession is already underway. Data show that the US heavily relies on Chinese goods. More than 70% of smartphones, laptops, and toys are imported from China. though with time, these can be manufactured in other countries. Meanwhile, China faces its own economic headwinds. A property crisis, local government debt, fiscal constraints, and high youth unemployment have left the economy vulnerable, and this was before the trade war escalated this month. There are some signs of potential de-escalation. US President Donald Trump said he's, quote, waiting for a call from Beijing, end quote, while Chinese officials maintain that they are open to dialogue but refuse to make the first move. As Wen Tiseng of the Atlantic Council noted, China's current posture is aimed at shaping global perspectives. Quote, they want to appear as the responsible power, not the instigator. End quote. With no resolution in sight, the trade war threatens to spill further into financial, technological, and geopolitical arenas, at best reshaping global commerce, and at worst leading to full decoupling. And speaking of geopolitics, amid an increasingly volatile global landscape, the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation has published a comprehensive report urging American businesses to overhaul their geopolitical risk strategies, especially with regard to China. Published this week, entitled High Stakes, a Framework for Geopolitical Risk Management, the report underscores how companies must evolve to navigate a world where the lines between economics, national security, and global power politics are increasingly blurred. The report identifies China as the number one long-term concern for US companies, regardless of the size or nature of their operations there. Survey data from nearly 200 companies reveals that 83% of chamber respondents and 70% of the Association of Corporate Counsel cited China as their top geography of concern. Risks stem from China's security-focused political economy, regulatory opacity, and growing alignment with countries like Russia, alongside US policy responses such as export controls and investment screenings. Despite mounting risks, including Beijing's unpredictable national security laws, potential raids on foreign firms, and tightening control over data and innovation, many US businesses remain deeply tied to China. Around 70% of surveyed companies reported plans to maintain or expand their operations in China, attracted by the country's vast market, established supply chains, and skilled workforce. Now, it's crucial, of course, to note that this survey was done before the latest escalation in trade and tariffs. We note, too, that this reliance also comes at a cost. One American company, for example, recently found itself targeted in a broad Chinese retaliatory probe after new US tariffs were imposed. These were tariffs that were introduced back in February, though. China's expanding legal framework on data security and counter-espionage has only deepened the risks for foreign firms, prompting some companies to quietly shift production away from China, though few disclose such moves openly, fearing backlash from Chinese authorities. To address these challenges, the Chamber report strongly recommends that companies establish dedicated geopolitical or China-specific risk committees, reporting directly to CEOs or corporate boards. These bodies should be tasked with monitoring evolving regulatory landscapes, coordinating compliance strategies, and integrating national security considerations into business decisions. Quote, this is about future-proofing US firms, end quote, said David Fagan, a co-author of the report and partner at Covington & Burling, adding, quote, we're equipping companies with the tools to reduce vulnerability in an era when geopolitical tensions, especially with China, are no longer background risks, but frontline realities, end quote. With decoupling dynamics gaining momentum in Washington and risks rising in Beijing, US businesses now face the challenge of balancing access with resilience in a new era of global uncertainty and potential China-US decoupling. Many of these US companies would not have been taken off guard by China's moves in recent years, and indeed in recent weeks, if they followed China Update, because we have been following the country closely day by day. If you want to be on top of developments in this country, including in relation to this unfolding trade war which is reshaping our global order before our eyes, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Hit the bell notification icon and you will be on top of the most up-to-date analysis as it's released. If you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button, and Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. It has always been my commitment to be primarily reliant on the audience rather than corporate sponsorship to keep going, so this is also a huge help. Let's continue. European Union leaders are preparing for a rare back-to-back summit in Beijing this July. part of efforts to re-engage with China amid mounting tensions with the United States and growing pressure on the global trading system. According to Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post sources, European Council President Antonio Costa and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen have accepted that a second successive summit must take place in China, despite the usual practice of alternating venues, due to Xi Jinping's apparent reluctance to travel to Brussels. The move has stirred criticism among some observers, who view the EU's willingness to accommodate China's preferences as a signal of diplomatic imbalance. Veteran China analyst Bill Bishop, for example, expressed yesterday, quote, "With Xi reluctant to make the trip to Brussels, the EU leaders have accepted they must travel to Beijing if they want face time with the Chinese leader. That is just pathetic and sends all the wrong signals to Xi and his team." End quote. Still, the trip reflects the EU's urgent desire to stabilize and advance ties with Beijing, particularly in the face of escalating US-China trade friction that is increasingly impacting Europe. On Thursday, China's Ministry of Commerce released a statement following a video dialogue between Commerce Minister Wang Wentao and European Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security. Two sides reaffirmed their commitment to preserving the multilateral trading system centered on the WTO and pledged deeper cooperation. Both sides reportedly agreed to begin consultations on market access and immediately launch negotiations on electric vehicle pricing commitments, an increasingly sensitive issue as Chinese EV makers gain ground in Europe. The statement also indicated that China and the EU would resume their trade remedy dialogue mechanism to address trade frictions and potential diversion issues. However, no official confirmation or readout has been released by the European Union side, prompting some skepticism about the extent of consensus described in the Chinese report. It is not uncommon for Chinese statements to portray a more cooperative stance than may actually exist. The summit comes at a time when the EU's economic and diplomatic alignment with the US is under strain, and some member states, including Spain, are openly seeking closer trade ties with Beijing. As Washington pursues its tariff measures, Brussels seems to be recalibrating its strategic positioning in a shifting global order. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a great Saturday. Have a restful weekend. It's been a huge week. And no doubt next week is also probably going to be a big week. So I hope you have a restful weekend, and I will see you for a new week of updates on Monday.